Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are strapping in for what is truly one of the most chilling historical autopsies we have ever undertaken.
hmm
We're diving deep into the absolute final terrifying years of the Vaal civilization. This was an empire that didn't just collapse from, external pressure or slow decay.
No.
It seems to have been consumed almost instantaneously by its own relentless, terrifying internal ambition.
This is a history that reads like a nightmare, yet our sources insist this material constitutes the factual, real history of this staggering empire.
Yeah.
We are looking at a hyper-accelerated timeline of moral degradation, and it's all dominated by two figures whose ambition just became lethal. Queen Atziri, obsessed with eternal beauty, and her terrifying, brilliant chief thaumaturgist, Doriani.
And the scope of this collapse is it's breathtaking. This isn't a story of slow decay at all.
No.
Our sources present a detailed, chilling account of ambition, of science, and this esoteric power thaumaturgy without limits, and the ultimate cataclysmic price they paid for seeking perpetual life.
Indeed. We're charting the downfall of a civilization that likely numbered in the millions.
The millions.
And they vanished in what one eyewitness account later recorded as, and I'm quoting here, a blink of Solaris's burning eyes.
Wow.
So the mission today is precise. We have to function as forensic historians here, understanding the motivations and the fatal decisions that were made.
Right.
I mean, how does a society reach these dazzling technological and magical heights only to dissolve into mass human sacrifice and absolute tyranny?
Yeah.
We need to connect the dots between that dazzling technology, profound hubris, and utter moral collapse.
It's an autopsy of hubris.
It is,
Yeah.
pure and simple. And it begins with the woman who held all the power.
Okay, let's unpack this. We start with the woman who set this entire horrifying clock ticking, Queen Atziri. The initial descriptions of Atziri are immediately conflicting, and this tension is, I think, central to her character. She was undeniably intelligent, capable, and she ruled, apparently unquestioned, over a bloodthirsty empire of volatile nobles.
Which is no small feat.
Not at all. And the complexity is that the populace, the sources tell us, adored her and feared her in equal measure. She was clearly a master of political power, holding the reins over this inherently unstable system of competing aristocrats.
And that tension didn't just define her rule, it really defined her as a person.
Yeah.
Vaal writings universally hail her as the most beautiful woman of the era, but that beauty was immediately juxtaposed with this chilling caveat that she was also the most dangerous.
Right.
Her motivation was singular, and it superseded everything else: eternal life and perpetual youth. And for that goal, she was willing to sacrifice anything.
And that willingness became the engine of the entire societal collapse.
It's almost impossible to reconcile these accounts, isn't it? I mean, how could a woman who was capable and intelligent enough to manage this volatile political structure simultaneously enforce something as bizarre
And psychologically vulnerable.
as the Court of Mirrors?
Yeah.
Was she truly brilliant or just pathologically narcissistic?
That's the question that defines the surviving historical debate. Let's look closer at the physical setting of her power. The Court of Mirrors.
This is one of the most vivid and utterly bizarre details from the surviving records.
I mean, just imagine it.
Her throne room was lined, floor to ceiling, with reflective surfaces, and she herself held court. Well, naked.
And demanded the same stripped vulnerability of anyone seeking an audience with her.
Imagine stepping into that environment, completely exposed, knowing that the most powerful woman in the world, radiating capability and menace, is staring at you in a hall of infinite reflections.
It's absolutely mesmerizing political theater.
And this practice immediately split the historians who tried to make sense of the Vaal end. One theory, the sort of ethical one, posits it as an extraordinary rule of governance. The idea that a naked man, stripped of all symbols of rank and wealth, had nothing to hide.
So a commitment to radical transparency.
Exactly. However uncomfortable it implies, she wanted pure, unadorned truth in her dealings.
That seems almost hopelessly naive, though, given the environment she was ruling.
Exactly. The more calculated and, frankly, the more historically plausible interpretation is that it was a pure psychological power play.
A mechanism of control.
Yes. The sources note that Atziri was a woman of striking physical presence and intoxicating sensuality. Her beauty wasn't just an attribute. It was a weapon she actively deployed.
So if a woman like Atziri, beautiful and naked, was conducting courtly engagements while her audience was shamed and exposed.
She would have been, as the source says, very difficult to refuse.
So the nakedness of her audience stripped them of their symbolic authority, their clothing, their armor, their jewels, while her own physical presence became this magnified, weaponized symbol of absolute, overwhelming command.
It's genius-level manipulation.
It is.
But if the Court of Mirrors truly existed, it points most strongly to vanity being the ultimate truth here. The sources are unequivocal in their condemnation of this self-obsession. They call vanity the most insidious of all sins.
And this extreme self-obsession wasn't just a personal flaw.
No, it became the foundational weakness that quickly began to dictate state policy. It explains why resources were diverted from stabilizing the empire to finding alchemical solutions for youth and longevity.
Weakening the empire structurally long before the final cataclysmic collapse.
Her love for herself entirely overshadowed any responsibility or love she might have had for her people.
And that combination of desire and calculated fear ran through her personal life, too. She was famous for her many lovers, yet those relationships were laced with this intense, macabre coercion and control.
It speaks volumes about the darkness of her rule. The sources say those who didn't come willingly came by liquid persuasion.
Right, thanks to an artifact known as the Elixir of Allure.
This dark concoction was rumored to attract the drinker's ideal mate, even across great distances. It was a guaranteed way for Atziri to capture the attention of anyone she desired.
And the horrifying, visceral detail is where she chose to keep this elixir, not in some crystal flask, but in the skull of her favorite lover. It's this macabre juxtaposition of intense personal desire and absolute, literal emotional control. It just cements her complete disregard for the human lives she consumed.
It reinforces the fact that she viewed people not as subjects or equals, but as resources to be utilized or trophies to be possessed. Her power, however, wasn't localized. We know her imperial reach was vast. Records suggest her influence extended to the distant shores of Oriath,
which she used as a sprawling vault for all her special shinies, including that purifying elixir. She was an imperial force extending her consumption far beyond the heartland.
And we see the instantaneous, brutal consequence of that paranoia and imperial reach crystallized in the unfortunate story of Kishara, the explorer.
Oh, yes.
Kishara was a remarkable figure, described as a tough-as-nails Vaal lassie.
An intrepid explorer who navigated the continent using a powerful thaumaturgical artifact she called the Star,
which hummed with energy and could guide his mistress anywhere.
And the conflict was so petty, yet so telling of Atziri's character. Kishara, being this free-spirited sort, brought back external perspective from the edges of the world. She dared to, as a source puts it, prick the royal arse with some spiky facts from the outside world.
She challenged the queen's isolated, self-obsessed worldview,
which Atziri in her paranoia could not tolerate.
No. The consequences were instant and savagely disproportionate. Kishara almost lost her head. Atziri immediately seized her ship, a vessel representing external knowledge, and then sacrificed her entire crew.
That is pure, unadulterated brutality against one of her own people, simply for speaking truth to power.
But Kishara, thankfully, proved cunning. She managed to escape Atziri's talons, but she realized that the Star, that powerful navigational artifact, could not fall into the queen's hands.
So she hid it. She secreted the Star near the causeway leading to the old Vaal city, explicitly to keep it out of the hands of a tyrant like Atziri.
And that act of resistance is profound. What would have happened if Atziri, already obsessed with mastery and expansion, possessed an artifact that could guide her wherever she wanted to journey?
That kind of artifact in her possession, combined with her ambition for eternal life.
It could have accelerated her disastrous final experiments dramatically. It might have given her the key to resources she hadn't yet been able to reach.
So what the Kishara incident ultimately proves is that Atziri's paranoia and self-serving brutality were instantaneous and comprehensive. She would sacrifice valuable citizens and external knowledge if it threatened her control or her singular worldview.
She was a queen obsessed with her own reflection and her own longevity. And that obsession was about to find its perfect, monstrous counterpart in her chief scientist.
That kind of absolute power, driven by eternal vanity, naturally requires a tool capable of delivering the impossible.
Yes.
And that brings us perfectly to Doriani, the man who dared to promise the queen exactly what she wanted.
Let's transition now to Doriani, the queen's thaumaturgist. He's introduced as a figure of monumental, almost mythical intellect.
Some sources call him the greatest hero of our era, and simultaneously the brightest mind our civilization ever produced. How do we reconcile hero and architect of collapse?
He was the intellectual engine behind the Vaal's terrifying rise. His contemporaries, while horrified by his methods, were just awestruck by his capability.
Right.
Kitsuli, another great mind of the time, believed that given more time, Doriani could have extended their technological and magical reach across the entire world.
Maybe even mastering the stars themselves.
The stars themselves. He was a man defined by boundless scientific capability paired with a complete zero moral compass. He saw morality not as a framework, but as a limitation to be discarded.
And he didn't hide that lack of morality. We have Doriani's own manifesto for his work, and it is chilling. He gathered the greatest minds in the empire for journeys of discovery with a stated, horrifying directive: no ethical bounds, no moral limits.
That sentence is the catastrophic historical thesis of the Vaal civilization.
It is.
It licensed everything that followed. His goals, driven partly by the Queen's vanity and partly by his own intellectual hubris, were literally impossible. They sought immortality, not just through alchemy, but through machinery and biological augmentation.
They sought a complete understanding of the fundamental concept of corruption, not just observing it, but mastering it.
And perhaps most arrogantly, they even sought to master time itself, moving beyond the linear experience of existence.
So that brings us to Doriani's specific scientific expertise: thaumaturgy. We can't just treat it as vague magic. What did the Vaal sources suggest this power actually was?
For the Vaal, thaumaturgy wasn't just spellcasting. It was the manipulation of metaphysical energies, often tied directly to life force or captured consciousness.
So it was codified, measured,
and used as an industrial power source, hence the soul cores we'll discuss later. Doriani revolutionized this field, moving from simple energy transfer to complex bioengineering and even dimensional manipulation.
He believed that matter and spirit were interchangeable power sources,
provided you have the correct catalysts. And to achieve these impossible goals, Doriani needed inspiration, a model for breaking the laws of nature. And he found it in the most terrifying source possible, the entity known simply as the Beast.
Right.
He dedicated his life to studying this entity, describing it not as a threat, but as a scientific marvel. He called it a thing of beauty and a work of genius, capable of changing the fundamental nature of our existence.
So for Doriani, the Beast was empirical proof that the laws governing life, death, and matter could be utterly shattered.
Precisely. So the Beast, which sources imply was this vast, almost sentient source of metaphysical energy, or perhaps a slumbering divine entity, was the ultimate case study. Doriani believed they could replicate its power.
And his work, the systematic experiments with life, death, machinery, augmentation, were all inspired by this entity.
Yes. The core belief underwriting all his horrific acts was that they could surpass the impossible if only they were willing to administer sufficient sacrifice.
To Doriani, the life of an individual was merely a quantity of potential energy.
And this philosophy led directly to the sordid experiments detailed at Vaal, Doriani's seat of power. Sources suggest his influence there was second only to Atziri.
And the glyphs found describing his projects are allegedly too stomach-turning to discuss.
The progression of this scientific exploration is a perfect blueprint for societal collapse. It started perhaps with pragmatic needs.
Right.
Initial research involved combining animals in unexpected ways, producing ferocious, augmented guards through hybridization chambers and primitive stone technology. This was the utilitarian phase of their mad science, creating superior fighting forces for the empire.
But utility quickly gave way to extreme narcissism and, well, biological extremism.
It did. Near the end of their civilization, the focus shifted entirely to the human form. The human body itself became as clay to the boldest scientists, and blood became their medium.
They were systematically altering their own bodies in pursuit of beauty and perfection, which is a dark echo of the Queen's own goals.
And that detail is so horrifying because it demonstrates a collective pathology. It wasn't just Doriani forcing this on others. A significant portion of the elite were subjecting themselves to these painful, irreversible alterations.
And in doing so, they completely lost all perspective on what it even meant to be human.
These were the infamous bloodbathers, individuals who were so far gone in their pursuit of altered, augmented, or perpetually youthful forms that they ceased to resemble the people they once were.
It's a perfect illustration of Doriani's philosophy in practice, sacrificing innate humanity for a perverse, grotesque vision of perfection.
And I have to ask about the political context here. Doriani wasn't just a lab coat, he was a power player.
Oh, absolutely. He was foremost among the ambitious and amoral men in this deeply tiered empire based on brutal competition.
That is absolutely crucial. Doriani's success wasn't just measured by scientific breakthroughs, but by his ability to navigate the cutthroat political landscape and deliver the impossible to the Queen.
the Vaal Empire thrived on brutal competition between nobles.
And the fact that he was second only to Queen Atziri herself tells you that he was the most ruthless and most capable of delivering what she truly desired, power and immortality, regardless of the cost in human lives or material resources. His ambition was the perfect counterweight to Atziri's vanity.
So the queen's vanity demanded an impossible goal, and Doriani's intellectual arrogance promised to deliver it no matter the ethical vacuum required.
Exactly.
That deadly relationship drove the creation of their final, terrifying infrastructure.
Yes, and that infrastructure was the massive temple complex that became the graveyard of their civilization.
Right. This intense pressure and ambition culminated in the construction of the Temple of Atziri. Sources agree it was built during the final, frantic years of the empire, described as the most famed in all Vaal history and myth.
Atziri is a nexus of conflicting yet equally terrifying historical records. It forces us to ask, what exactly was this place?
Was it genuinely the birthplace of technology so advanced that its fall set humanity back 1,000 years, or was that just the propaganda of a dying empire?
Or was it merely a magnificent, fiercely protected treasure house for Queen Atziri, a monument to her ego?
The darkest suggestion is far more pervasive, that it was a locus of corruption, a temple dedicated to the worship of the unspeakable, a place of vile sacrifices.
And the evidence leans heavily toward the darkest interpretation, regardless of its technological output. The records confirm that once the Vaal discovered power could be directly gained from sacrificing the living, Atziri became a literal death march for the lower classes.
The apex of ascension.
They called it the apex of ascension. It perfectly illustrates how their spiritual fervor, technological reliance, and tyrannical structure merged into a single system of consumption.
And despite this critical central function, there was widespread internal political rot. Sources suggest that grand plans for Atziri were stifled by fierce bickering between its architects.
That detail is incredibly telling. It shows that even in the face of absolute collapse and the Queen's ultimate mandate, the Vaal system was still choked by internal politics and self-serving noble rivalry.
So it wasn't a streamlined, efficient tyranny.
No, it was a deeply dysfunctional, intensely competitive one. But despite the inefficiency, Atziri's influence grew so great that Atziri eventually moved her seat of power into its walls, taking the throne of Atziri. The temple became the state.
And Doriani was right there alongside her, conducting specialized gem research in its final days, likely in his own institute built within the temple walls.
Atziri was the stage for the final bloody act.
What's also clear is that the temple was operating under immense duress. Records speak of a pervasive fear, something referred to as a haunting death, or a horrifying murderous entity laying siege to the complex.
So they weren't just practicing human sacrifice. They were fighting for their lives. They had to station vast numbers of warriors in the Hall of War and breed creatures in hybridization chambers just to defend the temple infrastructure.
And Doriani himself, usually so clinically detached, referred to fighting a demon of Atziri.
So the empire was under intense, deadly threat while simultaneously consuming itself from within to fuel its own defense and its queen's ultimate quest.
And that internal consumption brings us to the core foundation of Vaal power, the soul cores.
This is where the Vaal civilization truly achieved its pinnacle of horror and its moral nadir. Their sophisticated technology, which animated their massive, sentient stone constructs, the stonemen, and powered their vast cities, was entirely run by these blood crystals, or soul cores.
Soul cores were manufactured crystals that provided engraved power currents, essentially batteries of kinetic and magical force.
But the process of creation is what makes them unique and profoundly wicked. They were made by sacrificing human beings and trapping their souls, their very consciousness, within a crystal lattice.
We need to spend time on the mechanism here for the audience to understand the sheer technological depravity.
Right. The Vaal scientists essentially figured out how to use thaumaturgy to force the non-physical essence of a dying human into a physical crystalline structure. This process of trapping the soul provided the engraved power currents, a perpetual agonizing energy source.
I understand the practicality of it as an energy source, but tell me about the social progression. The chilling detail is the moral slippage of how they justified this.
The practice started with a perverse veneer of justice. Initially, soul core creation was reserved as a punishment for heinous crimes.
It was a mechanism for eternal justice, or so they claimed.
Exactly. But as the Vaal society grew rapidly reliant on this stone technology, the stone men were essential for construction, defense, and labor, the demand for cores increased exponentially.
And that demand created an unsustainable engine of consumption.
Absolutely. They eventually hit a profound population crisis because more and more people were sacrificed to fuel machines. As one external observer noted, it was quite silly for such an intellectual people to rely on the most precious and finite resource, human souls, as an unsustainable fuel source.
Yet that was the disastrous reality of their downward spiral. They literally prioritized the lives of machines over the lives of their citizens.
And the truly chilling implications here are the sensory details of the imprisoned souls. This wasn't just death, it was eternal torment.
The rumors persisted that the victims remained fully aware inside their imprisoning blood crystals, existing in eternal agony.
Think about what this implies for the engineers handling these components. There are unnerving sensory details associated with these cores. They're consistently described as being warm to the touch, radiating a living warmth encased in crystal.
And sometimes, if you listen closely, a distant scream echoes.
You are holding the bottled agony of a person that runs their empire. It makes the entire civilization run on trauma.
And the power of the core depended on the quality and intensity of the soul trapped within.
Yes, the soul core wasn't just a generic battery. We have the specific example of Blackjaw, a notorious criminal. His isolated soul core retained much of his violent personality. The construct powered by his core was excessively violent and displayed genuine anger in combat, a quality the Vaal actually considered a plus for a guard machine.
This demonstrates a complete and utter dehumanization where their citizens, even criminals, were seen purely as energetic resources to be judged based on their capacity for power generation or useful rage.
This system was now fully committed to self-consumption. The soul cores paved the way for the Queen and Doriani to seek their ultimate self-destructive prize.
Okay, so the stage is set for the final desperate push. This is the ultimate synthesis of Doriani's science and Atziri's vanity, driven by the Empire's reliance on consuming life.
And the tipping point was the horrifying anomaly of Zerfi.
Tell us about Zerfi, because his story is utterly unique and bizarrely central to the final days.
Zerfi was a Vaal noble and notoriously the civilization's most infamous serial killer.
Right.
The anomaly starts immediately with his lifespan. He lived for 168 years, which was more than 3 times the current imperial average, in a time when lifespans were already being shortened by the Empire's frantic pace and consumption of its population.
And his crimes were systematic, ritualistic, and targeted. Over a period of 128 years, he abducted, tortured, and murdered 13 noble gemlings, all precisely in their 20th year.
The consistency of the age is key.
And what made him infamous wasn't just the sheer number, but the calculated quality of his heinous acts. Sources claim he was a master at inflicting the most prolonged and agonizing demise.
Post-mortem analysis of his victims revealed that all the horrific trauma, the mutilation, and the pain occurred while the victims were still alive.
His techniques were so refined that he could inflict the maximum possible pain the human body is capable of sustaining without allowing the victim to expire prematurely.
That suggests a long, slow process intended to extract or transfer something specific, not just simple murder.
Exactly. Then comes the mystifying detail of Zerfi's death. He was found next to his 13th and final victim.
And this victim was strangely unmolested and unmutilated, simply dead.
And when the autopsy was performed on Zerfi, the results were astonishing. His corpse possessed the physiognomy of a man of 20 years, not 168. He died looking like one of his victims.
He was literally dying young, having lived ancient. His own grim philosophy explains the method. You give them death and take their youth.
It forces the chilling philosophical question. Had Zerfi, through this precise agony and death ritual, somehow persuaded life and death to kiss?
He had found a horrifying, agonizing mechanism for transferring vitality and prolonging his own youthful appearance.
And this information landed squarely in the lap of the most vain woman in the world.
Atziri's reaction was immediate and absolute, driven by her supreme desire for perpetual youth and beauty. She seized the opportunity.
And the consequences for the Empire were instant. She ordered Doriani to drop everything and investigate Zerfi's longevity, giving him supreme, unquestioned authority to make any effort within the realms of possibility and to act without fear of question or consequence.
That phrase, without fear of question or consequence, is the final ethical death warrant for the Vaal.
It licensed industrial mass murder.
Absolutely. We have the chilling evidence remaining in the archives. Manifests containing endless lists of names, page upon page, of young men and women ages 16 to 26, sent to Doriani for processing.
So this wasn't incidental sacrifice. This was the state-sponsored creation of a biological resource pool.
Why that specific narrow age range, 16 to 26?
Doriani's researchers determined that only those of full and recent maturity possessed the necessary vitality and resilience. They needed resilient bodies to harvest the secret of Zerfi's life transfer and survive the necessary procedures without succumbing to premature expiration.
If they died too fast, the transfer mechanism failed.
This confirms the final, fatal turn of the empire. The queen, in her obsession with eternal beauty, was prepared to slaughter her own people on an industrial scale.
Vanity truly became the state religion, and the queen's emotional detachment became absolute. She looked upon the adoration and the mass sacrifices of those who died for her with utter impatience.
She was beyond compassion or even satisfaction. She was purely a hungry vessel of ambition, waiting for Doriani to deliver the final solution.
The atmosphere leading up to the end must have been one of sheer terror and desperation.
It was frantic. The Soul Core shipments were intensely frequent, 74 shipments in the span of 3 moons, an unsustainable pace, yet potentially insufficient for the scale of the operation Doriani was running.
They were literally running out of people to process into power and vitality.
And the stakes, even for Doriani, were astronomical. He was a ruthless scientist, but sources hint at internal fear.
He knew the catalytic reaction they were preparing for would result in either immortality for all or death for all. He was willing to take that 50-50 gamble.
Though some of his subordinates, like Jaquani, were secretly making preparations for failure, even contemplating trapping their own souls in a core as a last desperate measure of survival.
The time for scientific clinical trials was over. The culmination of this desperate process, the communion, was planned for the harvest moon.
Atziri was reportedly drenching her altars with the blood of those deranged enough to question her vision.
This was no longer science, but frenzied, ritualistic madness. A final attempt to force the universe to yield to her will.
And this leads to the ultimate fatal miscalculation. Doriani, the great mind, was horrified by the destination.
Yes. Doriani eventually admitted, in a moment of utter desperation, she will attempt her communion with the beast.
That was the axe that crossed the final, ultimate threshold.
Doriani, the intellectual who studied the beast as a work of genius, had sought to harness it, but Atziri sought to become it or merge with it.
He was the one who stumbled into a realm of madness and awoke its master.
The experiment wasn't just about life transfer. It was about integrating with the entity that defined corruption itself.
And the beast, once awakened by this massive act of forced consumption and communion, proved to be far beyond their control.
The fall was not a slow decline measured in centuries or even decades of war. It was sudden, catastrophic, and absolute.
The Vaal, a civilization thousands of years in the making,
were gone in a blink of Solaris's burning eyes.
The suddenness is what makes the historical record so fragmented. A historian who somehow survived witnessed the nightmare firsthand.
The consequences were instant and absolute. Our queen is dead. Doriani is dead. So many have fallen. So many have changed.
The destruction wasn't localized. It suggests a massive, catastrophic energy feedback loop, or a reaction that consumed the entire infrastructure and population instantaneously.
The scale of the destruction is staggering, and it highlights the depth of their desperation in their final moments. In their very last days, records show that every crime was punishable by death, and the empire ran on blood.
But that blood was running dry.
They literally emptied their slave population of beating hearts and left behind a mountain of twitching dead. They consumed themselves to the very last drop, leaving nothing left to fuel their machines or sustain their queen's final experiment.
The consumption reached its logical, absolute conclusion.
And yet Doriani, the ultimate planner, must have anticipated the possibility of this cataclysm even as he drove toward it.
He did. Records show that despite his ingenuity and his horrifying confidence, he knew the end might come. He had commissioned a secret final device, a last resort, kept hidden even from Atziri.
Sources speculate it involves some kind of temporal manipulation or a gateway to the future, meant to save their legacy if all else failed, a means of abandoning all they had built and projecting it forward.
A time travel device. A Hail Mary pass to protect their knowledge from the coming apocalypse.
Precisely. But the last resort failed. Despite all his inventions and all his manufactured horrors, there was nothing Doriani could do to stop the end they had provoked.
And this planned escape device remains one of the great historical mysteries. Why didn't they activate it themselves?
Well, one strong theory is that the device had a fatal flaw. It required someone with pure Vaal blood in the future, in our time, to activate the gateway from the other side.
Implying a design anticipating a future helper that might not exist.
They built a keyhole, but never made sure the key would be there.
The ultimate failure of the man who promised to master time. But the most potent, chilling way to understand the scope of the catastrophe is through the refugee count.
From a civilization counting in its millions, a vast continental empire, the final recorded tally of survivors absorbed into the Atzirian people was exactly 3,126.
3,126 survivors. It's a number that speaks of absolute annihilation.
And those who survived were deeply traumatized. They were described as tattered, shambling survivors, bereft of their families, their wealth, and in many cases, their sanity.
They couldn't even coherently explain how the Vaal realm came to such a sudden, cataclysmic end.
We only knew the result.
Yet, the legacy of sacrifice remains clear in the ruins. They are monuments to hubris, yes, but also a silent reminder of a massive, terrible sacrifice made.
The trial master, a figure often associated with the remnants of Vaal knowledge, put it chillingly. He claimed the sacrifice was required so that the other peoples of Ray class might survive.
He suggested that the collapse of the Vaal, however destructive, contained the catastrophe, preventing the beast's full power from spreading.
He stated, "It only cost the life of my entire people and everything they ever built, what was given so that the other peoples of Ray class might survive."
The Vaal, in their final moments, inadvertently became martyrs for everyone else.
The irony is crushing. Queen Atziri's ambition only purchased eternal agony, not eternal life.
As one of the final Vaal letters stated, Atziri forfeited her sovereignty the day that she chose to murder her people, and the only eternity they earned was in the memories of the barbarians that shall plant their crops on our graves.
The two central figures, the most intelligent mind, Doriani, and the most beautiful tyrant, Atziri, sought to transcend humanity, and their ultimate legacy was becoming a grotesque, self-consumed fuel source for their own destruction.
What we have seen today is a horrifying lesson in the dangers of absolute power and intellectual capability when they are divorced entirely from ethical constraints. The collapse wasn't sudden in its creation. It was a decades-long, self-inflicted wound.
Where the highest intellectual achievement, Doriani's science and thaumaturgy, was fatally corrupted by the most primitive ambition, Atziri's vanity.
The entire timeline shows a society that systematically consumed its moral foundation, its population, and finally itself.
Which raises the crucial, timeless question of whether a society can truly progress and survive when its pursuit of power, self-glorification, and longevity entirely overrides its basic humanity and sustainability. The Vaal answered that question with a thunderous, catastrophic no.
You've just received a deep, detailed download of Vaal history, a journey through blood, beauty, and the cataclysmic price of immortality. Thank you for sharing these incredible sources for this deep dive.
It's a terrifying history, but a necessary one to examine.
Here is a final thought for you to explore as you walk away from the Vaal ruins today. The last lines of the Vaal records state, chillingly, "We have succeeded where our forebears did not. We have failed ourselves." If the ultimate result was apocalypse, and they died believing they succeeded in one terrifying goal, what was it? Did they achieve some perverse, altered form of eternal existence or mastery over a specific element? And was that ultimate success the very thing that caused their failure? Something for you to mull or explore on your own.